What I've seen is writing tests that are reliable and fast is hard. It's a problem that everybody seems to struggle with, and there's a number of reasons why. I think one very difficult thing about automated testing, just at the very beginning, is nobody even agrees on what terminology means.
Mhm.
So that's actually where my talk starts, is by laying out some common agreement on how I think about terms, the definition of unit test versus integration test versus end-to-end test. And I define a unit test as testing one
Mhm.
thing. And by one thing, I mean usually a single function or a single component.
Welcome to Momentum Chats. My name is Dave Agarwal, and I'm an organizer for Momentum, the annual developer conference held here in Cincinnati, Ohio. And today, to talk about Momentum and one of the awesome sessions that we have lined up, we have our speaker, Cory House. How are you doing, Cory?
Doing wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Do you want to give a short introduction?
Sure. I'm a independent consultant specializing in React. Been independent for quite a few years. Have a long history in a variety of technologies, but been focused on the front end for at least a decade now. So been busy with that and publishing courses on Pluralsight and tweeting way too much.
Yeah, your Twitter presence is very interesting and very helpful to a lot of people, I'm sure.
I sure hope so.
So your talk at Momentum is called Effective Automated Testing. Do you want to talk more about that? Tell me more about uh, automated testing things that you have seen in the wild that motivated you to give this talk.
What I've seen is writing tests that are reliable and fast is hard. It's a problem that everybody seems to struggle with, and there's a number of reasons why. I think one very difficult thing about automated testing, just at the very beginning, is nobody even agrees on what terminology means.
Mhm.
So that's actually where my talk starts, is by laying out some common agreement on how I think about terms. And when I say terms, I mean the definition of unit test versus integration test versus end-to-end test. Those are the big three that I think about. And I define a unit test as testing one
Mhm.
thing. And by one thing, I mean usually a single function or a single component. Now, from a unit test, then, if you hear that, that infers certain things. That infers that a unit test shouldn't do certain things. Like a unit test shouldn't be making an HTTP request, and it shouldn't be dependent upon the browser
Mhm.
directly. So there's a lot of how I define a unit test is what it's not. It is not integrating a bunch of pieces. It's running something small and isolated. And I also have just found that understanding this terminology helps people see what the target is, because there's a recognition that all types of testing have merit, but some of them tend to be more useful than others. I know for me, if I had to choose among the big three that I just mentioned there, I start by helping teams create end to end tests. And
Mhm.
the reason that I start there is because you get so much value out of that. And when I say end to end test, I mean nothing is mocked. We're in the browser. Again, I'm assuming a web app here. And we
Mhm.
are just making sure that we can click on every single link and that the page loads. And that is about as far as I go there. And I go that broad very deliberately because I found that it's helpful to write end to end tests that are minimalistic so that they run in a reasonable amount of time. If we start doing too much in an end to end test, that suite tends to get quite slow. There's ways to improve that, and that can be done. But up front, what I want to do is just merely have confidence that we can ship an application and we at least know that every page loads, it doesn't blow up. And
Mhm.
that gives us a fair amount of safety for a pretty minimal amount of investment. And those tests tend to be quite stable because they're not dependent on any little details in the database, for instance. They're merely just making sure that pages load. So
Mhm.
those are the two. I jump between unit and end to end. In the middle, I think about integration testing. And this is the area that I really like to spend most of my time because I found it's the sweet spot. By integration testing, I mean running in the browser, but mocking out HTTP calls and sometimes mocking out things like security.
Mhm.
so that we can run the UI in a huge number of variations and make sure that the UI responds as we expect, given different data responses from HTTP requests or different URLs and so on. So those are the big three and how I think about testing just broadly.
That's awesome. Yeah, one of the things that I particularly appreciated was um, the fact that end-to-end testing should start with those very simple things, not just because like obviously a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, but on top of that, uh, one of the big problems that I've found with end-to-end testing is that the setup and getting into that mindset and actually seeing end-to-end tests work, they put developers, especially me, they put us in a different mindset. They break some of that entry barrier into, okay, now we have end-to-end testing set up, now we know how to do that. So, and once we see those automated tests running, it gives us more confidence of, okay, now probably we can start creating more tests, provides a solid foundation for future tests. Yeah, that's awesome. Is this talk is something you've given at other conferences, or is this the first time at Momentum?
I gave the talk for the first time recently at Code Mash in January. So this will be the second time I've given it.
Nice. How was the reception there for the
Oh, they
talk?
hated it. That'd be fun. No, actually, it was a lot of fun. There is one point in there that I actually got applause in the middle of the talk, which
Okay.
really that's only happened to me 2 or 3 times ever as a speaker. And the reason that people applauded was because I said something fairly controversial that ended up resonating with the crowd. And the claim that I made is that I don't ask for permission to do my job well. This was in context of the idea around writing tests, because one other thing that I found is a headwind that people feel is my boss hasn't told me to write tests. My
Mm-hmm.
project manager may not tell me to write tests. The tickets don't specify that it needs to
Mm-hmm.
be there. So some people feel like if it's not in the ticket, they're not supposed to do it and they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to get in trouble. And frankly, I think they also are concerned that if they write tests, they're going to potentially delay completion of their ticket in a way that
Mm-hmm.
might make them look less than some other developer that's shipping more work. So there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of optics and political considerations here, but I found it very helpful to think about it in terms of, do I feel like this is something that I need to do my job well? And sometimes I'll admit it's not like this is a black and white decision. There are
Mm-hmm.
contexts where I frankly think that automated tests aren't necessary. Sometimes the application is small, sometimes it's short lived, sometimes it's quite simple, sometimes it's really an old app where we're not expecting to change anything and we're making a minor change. There are exceptions. Now, somebody could argue any of those, but as individuals, we have to make these judgment calls. And I don't really believe that we should be delegating those decisions to management, because we're closest to the decision. And effectively, what we're really being paid for is our professional judgment in these nuanced situations. And we need to have confidence to be able to say what we think is warranted in that situation.
Mm-hmm. For sure, yeah. I've heard similar sentiments about a lot of other things, like refactoring as well, or like
Yeah.
uh, structuring code in a certain way. And a lot of times, like people wait for some tickets to be open, like I'll refactor this part or abstract this out into something else so that we prepare for future things. But
Mhm.
no, that should be a part of doing the job well and not necessarily a separate task.
Right.
So thinking about automated testing, do you think in your experience it changes the way we approach writing code from the beginning, uh, having to if we start out with the mindset of we're going to have to write these tests at some point, so might as well structure our code a certain way, and maybe take this to the extreme. What are your thoughts on test driven development?
Hmm. So my take on test-driven development is nuanced, because I have found that while it's a useful pattern, it's not actually a pattern that I use very often. Part of the value potential of test-driven development is how it can help you write code that is testable. It helps you structure your design in a way that's friendly to testing. But one thing that happens after you've written code for a while, you start to realize how to do that anyway, which for me largely comes down to I strive to write pure functions wherever possible. So if that is my default mode, then I don't necessarily need the hand holding of TDD to make sure that I'm writing testable code. Those pure functions can be tested in isolation. The other thing is my concern about TDD is, at least for me, I often just sit down and start writing immediately. I have found the act of starting to code really gets me thinking creatively in a way that is helpful. Sometimes that's not the case, and often I'll start to head down a road and realize that I may be headed down a dead end road or making it harder than need be. And in those cases, I'll step away from the machine and go on a walk or have a conversation with somebody, anything to break the stalemate there. But in my experience, if I try to do TDD up front, unless I have a really clear vision for what my design is, I end up investing time sort of pouring concrete around my first idea. Now, code is malleable, but when I say pouring concrete, I think it was Ryan Florence tweeted out the other day that TDD is like getting married before the first date. And I thought, there's an aspect of that I understand. I don't think that's always true, because sometimes I have real clarity about the API that I need where I'm writing. A good example of this might be I need a function that formats a date in a specific way. So I name that function. I've got a pretty good sense it's going to accept, say, a JavaScript date, or maybe it accepts a string because it's going the other direction. So I know I have a pretty clear input and output. Those are the sorts of situations where TDD shines to me. Another might be where I'm wanting to make sure that a validation function does what I expect, or a adapter that converts from A to B. Here's my input, here's my output. Those are great for TDD. But outside of that, I often end up doing tests after development. And in many cases, that has, I found, been sufficient to go in and do things like integration testing in the browser after I've already put together a good portion of the code. Now, sometimes, oddly, here's a little pattern that I don't see very often, but I've really enjoyed, is using tools like Cypress and Playwright to do test-driven development in the user interface. And what that looks like is I write a test that says I should be able to go to this URL and fill out this form, click a button. And I might write the test initially to just say, I should be able to go to this URL. The test will fail. I'll go write a route and I'll stub in the page and the test will pass. And then I'll say, okay, I should be able to enter a first name in the form. Well, the form field doesn't exist yet. I'll go create that form field. And every time I hit save, I'm watching Cypress or Playwright automate the browser and start to go through. That form of test-driven development is wonderful, because what it avoids is me filling out a form manually 45 times, which is time consuming and it's annoying and you're just jamming on keys. So that is a form of TDD that I don't think gets enough attention, but I found really useful.
Yeah, I think a similar form of TDD is what Storybook seems to offer, the component-driven development, but it's scoped much more to a specific component instead of the entire application. But
right on.
Yeah, full agreed with all of those thoughts. So yeah, writing pure functions that can be tested. That's that's certainly like being approaching the way where you can write more testable code will certainly take away some of the requirements of, or some of the things that TDD provides. But if you're not there, maybe practicing some TDD can help you get to that point, or at least learn what more testable code looks like so that you can write it without TDD.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. So was about testing. You're going to speak at you're giving this talk at Momentum this year in October, and you were also a speaker at Momentum last year, correct?
That's
what was your
correct.
talk last year about?
Yeah, so my talk last time was creating reusable components that are actually reusable, and it's a catchy little tagline. the reason I gave that
Mhm.
talk is I've been seeing lots of companies struggle with this very thing, that
Mhm.
reusable components as a core idea isn't complicated, but doing them
Mhm.
well certainly is, because there's just so
Mhm.
many ways to fail. And recently I was actually riffing on this idea on Twitter and writing down all the reasons that somebody might not use a reusable component.
Mhm.
And it might not merely be technical things. Sometimes it's, I don't have confidence that the team that wrote this is going to be
Mhm.
available if I have bugs or if I need feature requests later, or I might feel like the docs aren't quite clear enough, or it might be that I don't even know it exists. There's a lot of ways to create a reusable component that isn't actually discoverable or attractive simply because of all the other work that needs to happen. And this is sort of no different than any other open source library, that when
Mhm.
we do open source, we can create a repository, put it out on GitHub and make it available. But that's only a tiny piece of what truly makes that code desirable to others, because they're
Mhm.
looking for all the other signals around it that say that they can actually trust that it does what they expect and will long term be something that they can commit to.
Mhm.
So I encourage companies to think of their reusable components like a product. And by
Mhm.
that, I mean brand them, promote them, have a team that supports it, have
Mhm.
SLAs around that, have a support channel. Think about your versioning in terms of semantic versioning. Be very honest when you have breaking changes. And of course, try to batch and minimize those so they're clear, and minimize that pain that might come from those sorts of things. So that those are just a few of the things.
Mhm.
But broadly, I found reusable components are a useful idea, but the one of the primary risks too is just reaching for them too soon, like presuming
Mhm.
that something is reusable before we've actually vetted it in a few places. So I really like what Jeff Atwood talks about, the rule of three, where he says, go ahead
Mhm.
and copy and paste a couple times. Once you've copy and pasted a few times, you have a good sense of what the true reusable API could be, because you've vetted it in multiple scenarios.
Yeah. I think one of the talks last year that I attended, uh, that was very interesting to see that this is where the industry is going. I think it has had a very similar idea. It was called a component is worth 1,000 APIs. Basically, with the thesis that a similar idea that that there was a time where REST APIs, public facing or external REST APIs, seemed to be all the hype, but now we're kind of converging on components as the reusable composition pattern. So
Mm,
maybe that's maybe we can package up our products or functionality to components instead of APIs and make it easier to use. So
mhm.
yeah, that's an amazing topic. How was the and you're still giving this talk um, these like this year at other conferences?
Yes, I just did at React Rally a few weeks ago.
Mhm. Yeah, amazing. I was there.
It was a
So
good time.
how was yeah, it was definitely a good time. So how was the experience speaking at Momentum? Was last year the first time, or have you been to Momentum before?
That was my first time speaking at Momentum, and it was a great experience. I got to be in a big room too, which was exciting. Plenty of space, had a good group. I
Hmm.
really enjoyed the event. Obviously, did, because I was excited to get accepted again this year. Looking forward to it.
Nice. And have you been a Momentum attendee before that, or where that
No, I'd
was last year
not.
also? Okay,
No, yeah, I guess first time was as speaking. So yeah.
that's awesome. How has the experience at Momentum been? Uh, like maybe versus other conference, because you speak at a lot of conferences.
Mm.
So
Yeah. So
what do you think? Yeah, go ahead.
So a few things stand out to me. One thing is I like community events, and Momentum certainly has that feel. I like that. Like the speaker dinner, for instance, was wonderful. The
Hmm.
experience of uh, I like the venue too, is pretty cool. Being at the casino, which I assume it's there again. I actually
Yep,
didn't check for sure. Okay,
it
good.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a nice place. Venue matters. Like every venue has a certain vibe to it,
Hmm.
and uh, yeah, Momentum's venue feels like I'm on vacation. It's just fun. It's a cool place. And yeah, I mean, other little things were just done well. The room size, like people weren't having to stand like at the edges or stand outside the doorways. I had plenty of room in uh, my talk, and
Mhm.
the other things are just, yeah, good food, good fun. Everybody there was friendly. So yeah, it was a wonderful experience.
That's awesome to hear. Uh, because we've been talking about, and I've also been thinking about this quite a bit myself on like how does a conference experience stand out? How does a
Mm,
conference does something different or have a more lasting impression on not just the speakers, not just the attendees, but everyone involved.
mm.
Include the sponsors, include the volunteers who spend a lot of effort helping the organizers. And yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? Because
I
you've been at a lot
yeah,
of
I do. I
conferences.
mean, I'll say the things that I get the most value out of is the speaker dinner is definitely the highlight for me, because I find the speaker dinner very much feels like I'm getting free consulting from a bunch of other people I respect. And there's also been this ongoing opportunity to make new friends at speaker dinners.
Mm-hmm.
There's something powerful about breaking bread, and given attendee parties are fantastic too, and I always enjoy
Mm-hmm.
those. But the difference is a speaker dinner often is a small enough group that you really do feel like you can get to know people that evening. And if there's one thing that I found a lot of conferences struggle with, is the speaker dinner sometimes is too loud just because speakers are loud. We all and
Mm-hmm.
you get too many people in a small room,
That's why
and
they're
that
called
you can end up
speakers.
yelling. Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So one thing I've been enjoying is some conferences are doing a particularly good job of having rooms that are larger for speaker dinners, where and allowing people to mill around. I
Mm-hmm.
found I really like too, because part of the importance of a speaker dinner is, again, like getting to meet new people, talk shop for a minute, make connections, find some new people you want to follow on Twitter. All that is really valuable to me. The other thing that I continue to do, though, is lunch is another place that I really like. And my habit for lunch is I try my best. This is hard for me, but I try my best to sit down at tables where I don't know people. And the reason I say that's hard for me, that used to be hard for me because it was intimidating. Now it's hard for
Mm-hmm.
me just because I've gotten to know a fair number of people, and it's really easy for me to just go sit down with my friends. But I found often sitting down at a table of people that I don't know gives me a whole different set of perspectives that I
Mm-hmm.
haven't heard before. And again, that's part of what's really valuable about a conference, is having your assumptions challenged and having the technologies that you use questioned as well.
Mm-hmm.
I very much think about conferences as a way to come home with a list of things that I want to learn more about. I don't really go to a conference to learn. I go to a conference to learn what I need to learn. So if I hear
Mm-hmm.
two or three people mention a technology or a pattern, I actually put it into my phone so that I can go home later and dig deeper.
For sure, yeah. And I'll tag on to that. Every time I've sat on a table at a conference with people I don't know, or start talking to people who I've never talked to, every single time it's been an amazing experience, and I went away with it. I should do this more.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. That's awesome. Thank you very much, Corey, for this conversation. Yeah, and make sure momentum tickets are still available at regular price. If you procrastinate too much, they might go up to late bird. So make sure you get your momentum tickets to hear more amazing thoughts on testing from Corey and all of our other and our amazing speaker lineup. Thank you very much, Corey. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you.